Welcome to Sleepy Historian, where old tales whisper by candlelight and memories gently drift into dreams. Tonight, let us journey back to a time long asleep in history.
Welcome, traveler of time and thought. Settle in, let your body rest, and allow your mind to wander gently into the past. Tonight, we will embark on a quiet journey, far away from the noise and rush of the present day. Our path will lead us along the winding roads of the Middle Ages, where men and women of all ages undertook pilgrimages across the uncertain landscapes of medieval Europe. The story of pilgrimage is one of faith, endurance, and hope, but also of discomfort, hardship, and unyielding patience. Through these long travels, pilgrims faced weary feet, unfamiliar food, and the threat of bandits or sickness. Yet they continued, one slow step after another, guided by the rhythm of their walking, the prayers on their lips, and the promise of a shrine at the journey's end. As you listen, imagine yourself moving at their pace, steady, deliberate, unhurried, each moment unfolding like the turn of a worn page. For hundreds of years, the most famous destination was Santiago de Compostela in Spain, where legend said the remains of Saint James the Apostle lay buried. But other shrines across Europe drew their own throngs of faithful. Some, like the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, were far off in the distant Holy Land. Others, like the tomb of Saint Foy in Conques, were tucked away in the remote French countryside. No matter the destination, every pilgrim had to contend with the same challenges. The roads were often little more than animal tracks through fields or along riverbanks, rarely more than a few feet wide and sometimes barely visible. Travelers walked shoulder to shoulder in single file, stopping only when the pace of the slowest in their company faltered. There was little time for sightseeing along the way, though some pilgrims, especially the wealthier ones, might have paused to admire an impressive church or a lord's castle. Most, however, had their eyes on the road ahead and the task of putting one foot in front of the other until, finally, the blessed sight of the shrine unfolded before them. The first recorded pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela was in the year 813, when a man named Aymery set out from his home in northern France and walked more than 500 miles to pay homage to the apostle. More than a millennium later, in 1519, the Spanish theologian and writer John Gonzalez de Mendo traveled the same route, though his journey took him almost twice as long due to illness and bad weather. His description of the road and its travelers offers a window onto the experience of pilgrimage. The roads, he wrote, are crowded with barefoot pilgrims who come from all over Europe, many of them nobles. They walk slowly and with difficulty, carrying heavy loads on their backs and begging for food along the way. When the travelers arrived at a village, they would do their best to stick together so they could protect one another against robbers. They slept wherever they could find a safe place and shared their meager meals by the light of a single candle. On feast days, when Mass was offered up for their safety, they felt a surge of hope and renewed determination. But when confronted by storms or sickness, they questioned whether they would ever reach their goal. Still, they persevered, driven by their faith and the desire for salvation. And what did they find at the end of their long journeys? What made the hardships of the road worthwhile? Join us next time as we explore the power of relics and the meaning they held for the medieval pilgrims who sought them out. Until then, may your nights be peaceful and your days filled with the promise of new journeys. Imagine being on a pilgrimage over 800 years ago. You are among thousands of other Christians making their way to a holy site. Some are traveling many hundreds of miles, and the journey takes months. The road is rough, dusty, and long. There are few comforts and many hardships. Can you imagine what this journey might have been like? Let's try. Picture yourself on a dusty road. The sun is not harsh but steady. The air is filled with the smell of earth, faint smoke from a nearby village, and the distant sound of cartwheels creaking. This is the life of a pilgrim in medieval Europe. Day after day, step after step, always moving forward. At first, the novelty of the journey might carry you along. The companionship of others, the sense of purpose, and the quiet prayers whispered beneath your breath. But soon the weight of the road begins to reveal itself. The feet that bore the burden. You are not the first to walk this path, nor will you be the last. For centuries, people have traveled here to seek healing, to give thanks, or to atone for sins. But why do you walk barefoot? What has brought you to this path? Perhaps you have heard tales of miracles at the shrine. Maybe you are seeking forgiveness for a troubled past. Or maybe you just want to be closer to God. Whatever your reason, the road is long and the journey is hard. Blisters became a constant companion. Imagine wearing shoes, stiff and simple, pressing against the skin. No cushioned soles, no modern support, only rough stitching and worn leather. After hours of walking, the skin would redden, swell, and split, and yet to stop was not an option. The road ahead still stretched for miles, and shrines did not come quickly. So pilgrims walked on, each step a reminder of their devotion and of their suffering. Food on the road. Meals were simple, often meager. A pilgrim might carry a small pouch containing bread, hard cheese, or dried fish. At inns or hospices, food could be purchased, but rarely was it generous. Imagine sitting at a rough wooden table, the room filled with the murmur of other travelers. A fire crackles in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. You eat slowly, savoring the taste of something different. Perhaps it's porridge made from barley or oats, a thin soup flavored only lightly with salt or pepper, or bread dark with coarse grains. Sometimes the food is warm and comforting, sometimes it's spoiled or poorly prepared, leaving many travelers ill. But it's eaten with quiet gratitude, for hunger makes even a bitter taste welcome. The road is not always safe. Bandits know that pilgrims carry coins, if only a few, and perhaps offerings for shrines. To walk alone is perilous, and so groups form, moving together in hopes of safety. Still, stories of robbery and violence are common. Every bend in the road, every stretch of forest or lonely bridge could hide danger. And so you walk with your head down, your eyes scanning the ground, searching for nothing and seeing everything. For a pilgrim on the road, trust is a luxury they cannot afford. Every shadow seems to hold a threat. Every stranger could be a danger. In this world of dust and danger, you must be vigilant. The road is long, the dangers are real, but your spirit is stronger. You walk on, each step a prayer, each mile a test of your faith. This is just one possible scenario of what a pilgrim's journey might have been like over 800 years ago. Of course, there were many different routes and purposes for the journey, and the experience of each individual pilgrim would have been unique. We hope that this short video gives you a small glimpse into this fascinating and challenging way of life. Thank you for watching, and we invite you to subscribe for more historical tales. Geoffrey Chaucer, the father of English literature, invites us on a timeless journey. Let's get started. As we leave behind the weary steps of the common pilgrim, let us now turn to the words of one who watched them, listened to them, and gave them new life in verse. Picture yourself seated by a quiet hearth. The low crackle of wood is a steady companion as a voice begins to tell a story. Not just one story, but many. This was the gift of Geoffrey Chaucer, a man who lived in the 14th century and who remains remembered as the father of English literature. Chaucer was born around the year 1343, a time when England was changing rapidly. The Black Death had swept through, leaving whole villages emptied. The 100 Years' War with France continued in bursts of violence and uneasy truces. The church held great influence, yet cracks of reform were beginning to show. Into this unsettled world, Chaucer lived many lives. He was a courtier, a diplomat, a customs officer, and above all, a poet. His work carried the mark of his travels. Sent abroad on royal missions, he encountered the writings of Italy, Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio, whose rhythms and ideas colored his own imagination. Yet when he turned to his greatest work, the Canterbury Tales, it was not lofty kings or distant heroes he portrayed. Instead, he looked to the Pilgrim Road. The Canterbury Tales begins with a simple scene, a group of pilgrims gathering at an inn in Southwark, London, preparing to travel together to Canterbury Cathedral, the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. From here, Chaucer took his title, and from the road, he took his characters. They are the stuff of medieval life, a knight returning from wars abroad, a miller with a bagpipe slung across his back, a nun who sang through her nose, a prioress with manners delicate but slightly exaggerated, a merchant, a cook, a doctor, even a humble plowman. In their diversity, he reflected the whole of medieval society, peasants and nobles, clergy and craftsmen, drawn together by the common purpose of pilgrimage. And so they set out, following a path well worn by countless feet that had come before them. Their destination, Canterbury, where the shrine of St. Thomas Becket drew Christian men and women seeking solace, pardon, or simply the company of fellow believers. The journey was one they shared, but their reasons for undertaking it were their own. Perhaps the knight sought to atone for the violence of war. Perhaps the miller wished to claim a saint's blessing on his honest trade. Perhaps the nun sought spiritual solace, or the prioress wished to display her piety. Whatever their motives, they were united now under the banner of pilgrimage. As the miles passed, Chaucer imagined a game to pass the time. Each traveler would tell a tale to while away the hours, some moral, some humorous, some gently mocking, others deeply serious. The result was a tapestry of voices. The miller's tale was bawdy, filled with trickery and laughter. The knight's tale was noble, recounting battles and ideals of love. The pardoner told of greed, even as he himself admitted to practicing it. And the wife of Bath, perhaps the most famous of them all, spoke boldly of marriage, authority, and experience in words that still surprise readers centuries later. Each tale was a mirror, reflecting both the storyteller and the society they lived in. In turn, the pilgrims and their stories reflected the broader picture of medieval England, a society wrestling with change, grappling with old certainties and new challenges, where the rhythms of rural life were ever present, even as towns grew and trade routes expanded. Through their words, Chaucer wove a portrait of an age, giving voice to those who might otherwise have gone unheard. For it is in the telling of stories that we find our humanity, our connection to others, and our understanding of the world. And so, as we sit by the fire, listening to the tales of these unforgettable pilgrims, we are reminded of the power of stories to unite us, to teach us, and to carry us through the journey of life. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support the channel, please consider making a donation. Chaucer's language, what makes Chaucer especially important, is that he wrote in Middle English, the language spoken by common people. Though not often preserved in lofty literature, Latin was the tongue of the church. French still held prestige among the nobles, but English, plain and earthy, was the language of markets, homes, and pilgrim roads. By writing in it, Chaucer elevated the everyday voice, giving it permanence and beauty. For us today, his words may sound unfamiliar, the letters forming rhythms that require patience to follow. But in his own time, they carried a freshness and immediacy, as if the voices of those pilgrims could be heard as clearly as the shuffle of their feet on the road. The reality behind the Tales. Although the Canterbury Tales is partly fiction, it rests on a foundation of truth. Pilgrims did indeed travel together, often forming bonds of companionship along the way. They did share stories, sometimes in the form of songs, prayers, or fables told around a fire at night. Chaucer took what was real and gave it structure, weaving it into an artful frame that has endured for centuries. An unfinished journey. Curiously, Chaucer never completed his grand design. He imagined over 100 tailies, but only 24 remain. Like a pilgrimage cut short, the collection ends before it reaches its intended shrine. Yet perhaps this incompleteness carries its own quiet truth, for not every journey is finished. Not every road reaches its end. Pilgrims themselves sometimes turned back or passed away before they arrived. The fragment that remains is enough to remind us of the long road and the voices that once filled it. Chaucer, the observer. What makes Chaucer so comforting to us today is the calm steadiness of his observation. He neither glorifies nor condemns his pilgrims. He listens. He notes the details, the curl of hair, the jingling of a bridle, the way a man carries himself. He allows each voice to speak in turn, creating not a sermon, but a gentle mosaic. And in this, we can feel the essence of pilgrimage itself, the slow unfolding of voices, the patience of the road, the blending of hardship and companionship. As you rest, imagine the pilgrims of Chaucer's tale. See them gathered at the inn, mugs of ale in hand, laughter mixing with prayer, each preparing for the miles to come. Hear their voices as the road begins, one tale after another drifting into the air. And perhaps, as sleep drifts closer, you too will find yourself walking with them, unhurried, observant, carried along by story. When I first read the Canterbury Tales, I knew I loved the work, but I had no idea why. Upon reflection, I've come to understand that it's the unobtrusive genius of Chaucer's achievement that makes his work so very great. To be sure, there are marvelous tales within the collection, stories of daring adventure or sly wit that leave us grinning from ear to ear. There's also the profound wife of Bath's prologue, which demands to be heard and will not be silenced. But I think what makes Chaucer especially important is that he wrote in Middle English, the language spoken by common people. Though not often preserved in lofty literature, Latin was the tongue of the church. French still held prestige among the nobles. But English, plain and earthy, was the language of markets, homes, and pilgrim roads. By writing in it, Chaucer elevated the everyday voice, giving it permanence and beauty. For us today, his words may sound unfamiliar, the letters forming rhythms that require patience to follow. But in his own time, they carried a freshness and immediacy, as if the voices of those pilgrims could be heard as clearly as the shuffle of their feet on the road. Though set in the distant past, the Canterbury Tales is grounded in a very human truth. The desire for company on a journey is as old as walking itself. In medieval England, as in our own day, travelers would often join up with others heading in the same direction, sharing not only the burden of the road, but its rewards as well. Chaucer's pilgrims are not a random assortment of humanity, but a carefully chosen ensemble, each type representing a recognizable facet of medieval life. There's the brash young knight, eager for glory, and his slightly exasperated fellow, whose piety is rivaled only by his itch for a good brawl. There's the widow, determined to make the most of her second chance at life. And there's the partner, whose easy smile cannot quite conceal his shifty eyes. We meet the wife who's had enough of marriage to last 7 lifetimes, and the reclusive hermit, the very picture of peaceful contemplation. No matter their station or age, these diverse souls find common ground in the act of storytelling, just as we do in listening to Chaucer's tales. While many pilgrims would have been illiterate, Chaucer knew how to spin a yarn. He understands how to keep his audience guessing, how to build suspense and reward curiosity. Each tale is a new world, full of magic and mayhem, romance and revelation. These stories, once composed and performed orally, were ideally suited for a time when entertainment came at a premium. Indeed, given the sometimes bawdy nature of some tales, it's hard to imagine a more wholesome form of diversion. Even when the subject matter turns dark, as in the tale of a noble knight betrayed by his treacherous host, there's always a strong sense of justice, affirming the triumph of right over wrong. It's also worth noting that despite the occasional lapse into social commentary, Chaucer's tales transcend their medieval setting. They speak to universal human experiences that continue to resonate with readers today. Love, loss, greed, forgiveness, loyalty, and betrayal. These are themes that echo across time and place, reminding us that we are not so different from those medieval travelers trudging along a dusty road. So the next time you find yourself weary from the journey's start, or perhaps returning home after a long absence, pull up a chair beside the virtual hearth. Pour yourself a mug of hot cider or steaming tea and settle in to listen to the tales of the Canterbury Pilgrims. You might be surprised at how much wisdom and mirth you'll find along the way. For in their simple humanity, these characters and their tales have the power to transport us to another time and place, while illuminating the timeless truths that bind us together. In science today, we stand between two perspectives. One sees in the shroud a mere artifact, a curious piece of history perhaps, but nothing more. The other sees in it the face of Christ himself, an echo of sacrifice and resurrection. Where do we stand? As we consider the shroud, let's leave aside the question of faith. Let's approach this relic of history as if for the first time. What do we see? On the surface, two things strike us. First, the image itself, so faint it can seem almost invisible, yet so lifelike it has stirred both awe and disbelief through the centuries. And second, the cloth upon which this image rests. Why is it so fragile, so oddly thin? Why does it show signs of wear and tear, scorch marks and patches, when it has supposedly rested in silver cases for so long? Is it possible that what we see here is not a relic at all, but a medieval forgery, a clever trick of paint or dye meant to capture the hopes and fears of a simpler time? Perhaps, but let's continue to examine what we see, for there are mysteries here that science alone cannot explain. In 1978, the shroud underwent scientific analysis, and the results were startling. No pigments, no dyes, no trace of any artificial coloring was found on the cloth. Yet the image seemed to glow under ultraviolet light as if illuminated from within. Further tests showed that the image had come about through a process of oxidation, a reaction between the linen and an unknown substance. All this pointed to a single conclusion. The image was not painted on. It was impressed onto the cloth as if by an unseen force. Here, science seemed to reach the limits of its understanding. Without the ability to peer into the nature of things, it could only marvel at the shroud and offer up questions without answers. Let us now turn our attention to the image itself. Who's this emaciated man with haunting eyes and a face that seems to stare into our souls? How did his form become imprinted on this ancient cloth? The answer, if the shroud is indeed authentic, may lie in a single moment of immense suffering. If the shroud really is the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth, then the image was formed not by paint, but by blood, by the very essence of his being as he hung on the cross outside Jerusalem. In that moment of agony, as he offered himself for humanity, his form was impressed not on stone or canvas, but on the linen shroud that swathed his body, a silent witness to the sacrifice on Calvary. Now, the shroud speaks to us of pain and death, yes, but also of something more profound, the resurrection. For if his body bore the marks of crucifixion, why does his face appear so serene? Why do his eyes seem closed in peaceful slumber rather than wide with the agony of death? Could it be that this image, so startlingly real, is not just a record of suffering, but a glimpse of the risen Christ, the conqueror of death? But regardless of our beliefs, there is much to marvel at here. For if nothing human brought forth this image, then how was it formed? By whatever means, the process was remarkably even. There is no blurring, no smudging, only a clarity that seems almost photographic in its detail. Every fold of the linen corresponds perfectly with every contour of the body, down to the smallest nuance. It is a mystery that defies easy answers, a relic that challenges our understanding of history and faith. We may choose to believe or to doubt, to accept or to reject the shroud's claims. But as we stand before it, we cannot help but feel the weight of centuries, the hopes and fears, the struggles and devotions of countless pilgrims who have come before us. We are linked across time to those who sought solace in this ancient cloth, to those who saw in its faded image the face of suffering and sacrifice, and in that suffering, the promise of redemption. Whether we see in the shroud a relic of faith or a puzzle to be solved, one thing is certain: it remains one of the most haunting and mysterious relics of history. For over 2,000 years, the Shroud of Turin has been venerated as a holy relic, supposedly the very cloth that wrapped Jesus of Nazareth after his crucifixion. But how did the medieval world react to this holy treasure? What was life like for the shroud during the Middle Ages? Let's find out. Welcome to the channel. Science meets mystery. In modern times, the shroud has been studied more closely than almost any other relic. Under microscopes, cameras, and even chemical analysis, it has yielded many secrets, yet never a final answer. Carbon dating tests in the late 20th century suggested the cloth might date only to the Middle Ages, raising doubts about its authenticity. But questions arose about the samples used, whether they had been repaired with later fabric. Scientists still debate the matter, some pointing to pollens on the cloth that match plants from the Holy Land, others noting the peculiar, almost photographic quality of the image, unlike paint or ink. The mystery remains. Neither fully proven nor fully dismissed, the shroud lies between faith and science, an object that invites both devotion and inquiry. The pilgrim's experience. For medieval pilgrims, the authenticity mattered less than the experience. To stand before the cloth was to feel part of something vast and sacred. Imagine the press of the crowd in a cathedral, candles flickering, voices murmuring prayers. Pilgrims leaned forward, eyes wide, some weeping, others silent, all held in the stillness of the moment. For them, the shroud was not only a relic, it was a mirror of faith itself, seen faintly, understood imperfectly, but held with devotion. The power of relics. The Shroud of Turin also reminds us of the wider medieval world of relics. Bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, vials of sacred oil all carried meaning, drawing pilgrims across miles of weary road. Some relics were authentic, others questionable, but their power lay in the active belief. They were focal points, tangible signs of the invisible. The shroud, with its faint image and uncertain history, embodies this paradox. It is both visible and elusive, both material and mysterious. In the Middle Ages, when Christianity was the dominant religion in Europe, relics like the Shroud of Turin held immense significance. People traveled from far and wide to see and touch these remnants of the past, believing they possessed healing powers or could grant wishes. The shroud, with its possible connection to Jesus Christ, was one of the most treasured relics of this time. A quiet reflection. Now let us return to the hushed atmosphere of a medieval church. You stand before the shroud, enveloped by the flickering light of candles and the somber reverence of fellow pilgrims. The air is thick with incense, mingling with the soft murmur of prayers and the rustle of devotional texts. The image on the shroud, though faint, captivates your attention. You contemplate the possibility that this very cloth had been used to enshroud the body of Jesus Christ. A profound sense of peace seems to emanate from the fabric, touching your soul with a tranquility you have never known. As you continue to gaze at the shroud, your thoughts drift to the countless individuals who have come before you. You imagine their awe, their touch, their fervent prayers echoing within these ancient walls. You realize that the shroud is more than just a piece of cloth. It is a testament to faith, a silent witness to history, and a source of solace across the ages. In the quiet of your reflection, You understand why people throughout history have held onto this relic so dearly. It represents a profound connection to the divine, a tangible link to the sacred past. Whether one believes in its miraculous powers or not, the shroud stands as a symbol of hope, reminding us of the enduring strength of the human spirit and our eternal quest for meaning and connection. And so your pilgrimage to the Shroud of Turin comes to an end. As you step back, taking one last glance at the enigmatic cloth, you feel a renewed sense of purpose. The shroud has touched you in ways you never expected, awakening your faith, your curiosity, and your spirit. You carry the experience within you, knowing that the true magic of the shroud lies not just in its physical presence, but in the profound impact it has had on your soul. It's me. Thanks for watching. What if I told you there is a way to reach heaven by walking only part of the way? Welcome to my channel. Join me to explore the hidden pathways of history. Now imagine a great cathedral rising above a medieval town. Its towers reach skyward, bells tolling across fields and rivers. Pilgrims, weary from their journeys, lift their eyes to see it glinting in sunlight, a beacon of promise. But what if I told you that this very same pilgrimage would have looked different to a wealthy noble or merchant? Would you believe me? Then let us walk a mile in their moccasins. First, we must understand how these wealthy pilgrims moved differently. While most pilgrims traveled on foot, the elite could afford pack animals like horses or mules to carry their burdens. They also had more options for lodging. Instead of sleeping in hostels or, heaven forbid, out in the open, wealthy pilgrims could stay in guest houses near the shrines or even have their own private rooms within the monasteries. But don't get me wrong, that wasn't all luxury. Pilgrimage was still hard for the wealthy. Ruts and mud could slow their progress, and robbers sometimes targeted pilgrims, believing them to be easy prey. The valuables these wealthy pilgrims carried weren't just for their own comfort. Much like today's religious tourists, many of them made offerings to the shrines they visited. But unlike today's offerings, which may be trinkets or money, medieval wealthy pilgrims often gave far more. These donations took many forms, from building or beautifying a church along the route to endowing an entire chapel dedicated to a saint. Take, for instance, the Hospital of St. Lazarus at the start of the Camino de Santiago. Built in the 12th century, it was a major stop for pilgrims on their way to see St. James's tomb. But who built it? Well, the answer lies with a wealthy widow named Maria. She endowed the hospital as an act of piety, ensuring that weary travelers would find rest and care before beginning their journeys. Her generosity is memorialized in stained glass, her very soul enshrined in stone. And it wasn't just buildings that these wealthy pilgrims shaped. They also commissioned works of art, from intricately carved choir stalls to monumental tombs for venerated saints. These creations didn't just adorn the pilgrimage sites, they defined them. And let's not forget the most opulent offering of all, relics. Imagine walking into a dimly lit chapel, the air thick with incense. Your eyes are drawn to a golden reliquary atop an altar, said to contain a fragment of a saint's bone or a lock of their hair. Such relics were prized by the wealthy, who believed that they had special powers to heal or grant wishes. Some of the most famous relics in Europe were brought to shrines along pilgrimage routes, drawing even more visitors and offerings to these sites. But where did these relics come from? And how did the wealthy obtain them? Well, that's a tale for another time. Pilgrimages were not solely about faith, but also about fellowship. And no group demonstrated that better than the Confraternities of St. James. These were groups of wealthy merchants who combined business with religion. As they traveled together, they offered mutual protection, shared expenses, and celebrated Mass together. This blend of commerce and Christianity was typical of many pilgrimage routes where trade and religion intertwined. The wealthy patrons didn't just shape the physical landscape of pilgrimage. They also influenced its very character. Through their donations, they attracted preachers, writers, and artists to their favorite shrines, helping to create a vibrant culture around these sites. Chaucer, the great English poet, was one such beneficiary. His work, The Canterbury Tales, immortalizes a pilgrimage with a group of very diverse travelers, reflecting the social spectrum of the age. As we conclude our journey into the world of wealthy pilgrims, consider this. We have walked with them, heard their laughter, and seen their generosity. But just as with any group, not all wealthy pilgrims were the same. Some donated out of genuine devotion, while others sought to wash away sins or gain status. Whatever their motives, one thing is clear: their impact on the landscape and culture of pilgrimage was profound. From the grand cathedrals to the everyday lives of fellow pilgrims, their influence shaped a world where faith and fortune intertwined. Before we part ways, I invite you to become a patron of this channel, ensuring that our journey through history continues. Thank you for joining me. May your path be filled with discovery and enlightenment. Until our next adventure, may you find magic in every moment and keep the wonder of history alive. Most folks think of cathedrals as buildings, just really big and old, but they're more than that. They're holders of stories, silent witnesses to lives lived 800 years ago. Take this one, for example. See how worn smooth this path is? Those are pilgrim tracks from hundreds and hundreds of years of people walking here, including me. Now look up at the vaulted ceilings and the carvings. This is what wealthy nobles did back then. They paid to have their coats of arms carved into the walls, so everyone passing by would know, hey, so-and-so paid for this. They were pretty important. Building a chapel like this was the ultimate flex. It was their way of saying, I'm so rich I can build a whole chapel in a major cathedral. Imagine showing up here as a pilgrim and seeing your name carved in stone for all eternity. That would make anyone feel important, even a pauper. But why would someone want to do that? Well, it's complicated. Back then, if you wanted to get closer to God, you had two options. You could live a life of service, helping the sick and the poor, or you could fund big projects like cathedrals and shrines. These wealthy nobles weren't able to walk the pilgrim roads themselves. They were too busy running their estates or making more money. So instead, they sent their chaplains and servants to do the walking for them. They'd give them money for food and lodging and say, here, go visit this shrine for me. I want you to pray for my soul. Sometimes they'd even send a priest along to make sure the servant didn't gamble or steal their money. But honestly, they probably just went and gambled and prostituted anyway. Now, I've been on the road for months and I've met plenty of pilgrims. But there's one type one haven't seen yet, the wealthy noble pilgrim. Most of the time when you see these guys in movies, they're fat and jolly and more concerned with eating and drinking than with praying. But there's nothing funny about being a pilgrim. Sure, sometimes it's fun, especially when there's music and dancing and games, but mostly it's hard and boring and lonely. I mean, just look at me. My clothes are dirty, my hair is greasy, and I haven't washed in weeks. But I keep walking because something keeps calling me forward, something I can't explain. Maybe the best way to understand the wealthy noble pilgrim is through their gifts. Because while they might not have walked the road, they certainly made it possible for others to do so. They built hostels and hospitals along the way, places where pilgrims could rest and get their strength back before hitting the road again. They knew that taking care of travelers was a holy duty, and they took it seriously. These gifts weren't just about helping pilgrims. They were also about impressing them. Imagine walking along and suddenly finding yourself in a beautiful courtyard with a fountain and statues and flowers everywhere. You might think you've died and gone to heaven, except that you haven't. You're still on earth, but you feel like you've been lifted up, like you're closer to God because you deserve it. After all, you're a pilgrim. The truth is, it takes all kinds to build something beautiful. You need dreamers who can imagine what it might be like to live in a world where Everyone helps each other out, and builders who can turn that dream into reality. The wealthy nobles might not have walked the pilgrim roads, but they made sure the roads were there. And without them, the rest of us wouldn't be able to experience the magic of walking to Santiago de Compostela. Next time you're in a medieval cathedral, look around you. See the worn stones and the high ceilings. Know that every inch of that building has a story to tell. There's the story of the humble pilgrim and the story of the wealthy noble. And together, their stories create something beautiful, something that has lasted for 800 years. Tonight we have walked the Pilgrim Road. We have felt the weight of blistered feet and heard the voices of Chaucer's storytellers. We have stood in quiet before the Shroud of Turin and glimpsed the lives of wealthy patrons whose donations built cathedrals that still stand. We have walked this road together. Many of you have journeyed with us from the very beginning. Some of you joined us for just a single episode. But no matter the length of your walk along this road, I hope you have felt something of its ancient magic, sensed the deep thrum of history beneath our feet and in our bones. For I know when I have walked this road in my own time, I have felt the spirit of pilgrims past brush against me in the crowds, touch my shoulder with a finger of wind across my cheek. I have heard the soft murmur of prayers in the chapels, the echo of bells across the fields bringing out their timeless message. I have looked into the faces of fellow pilgrims, their eyes shining with the same devotion, their steps echoing the rhythm of my own heart. We are all part of a great cloud of witnesses, a tapestry woven with the threads of countless lives. And I have stood in awe before the monuments of faith, the soaring spires and the timeless crosses, testaments to the enduring spirit of those who walked this road before us. They too had blisters on their feet and a song in their hearts. They too carried their hopes and dreams on their backs, just as we do. And I have seen in the faces of children the innocence of faith, the wonder of a world made new through eyes that have not yet grown weary or cynical. Their laughter echoes with the joy of those medieval children playing life's pilgrim's game, dancing at the crossroads, singing songs of faith and devotion. For this road is a living thing. It beats with the pulse of life, the laughter of children, the murmur of lovers, the quiet tread of the faithful. It is the story of common men and women, walking step after step, their feet carrying them toward a distant goal. It is also the story of nobles, shaping stone into monuments that would endure long after their own lives had passed, their names forgotten, their deeds long gone. But here they are, enshrined in marble, their legacy carved in stone. And I have stood among the silent stones and felt the presence of those who came before me, their footsteps imprinted on the very stones beneath my feet. I have breathed in the scent of the ages, the mingled fragrance of sweat and dust and faith. And I have known that I am only a pilgrim passing through, a temporary guest in a place where time seems to stand still. So as you rest now, dear fellow travelers, let your mind linger on the rhythm of these journeys, the shuffle of feet on dusty roads, the soft murmur of prayers in chapels, the echo of bells across fields, the distant song of a pilgrim's life. Imagine the way the past folds quietly into the present, the way you too walk roads of your own, seeking meaning, comfort, and peace. And with that thought, may you drift gently into rest, carried by the long, unhurried road of history.
Tonight's story comes to a close. If your eyes have gently shut, then I wish you a deep, peaceful sleep. Until we meet again in the next dream.